So we're now gonna continue the X4 build with bag number 5, which is the drive shafts and other parts of the suspension. I'm gonna open this up and try to arrange the parts. Separate the upper arms, put them aside for now. Quite a lot of parts in here because it's the whole suspension basically, except for the lower arms, of course, which are already on the car. Just gonna separate all these parts. We have all the anti-roll bar parts in here as well as the upper arm parts. Need to take all these plastic parts out of the mold trees, all the ball caps, also these drive shaft caps here. Some more ball caps. These are the rear hubs that are also included in this bag. And another ball cap. These are the pivot balls for the upper arms. I'm gonna save these for later. Anti-roll bar parts. And we're starting to get some order here. These are the turnbuckle parts, drive shafts. pins here for the drive shaft as well, both for the front and rear. I'm just gonna separate these screws here. Okay, so we're done separating all the parts and we can continue with the drive shaft build. The X4 comes with standard drive shafts, which are 58 millimeters long in the front. It's a ECS drive shaft, which you may be familiar with from the previous platforms. So it's a double joint drive shaft, which gives the least amount of friction in the front transmission. And on the rear, we have a traditional CVD 54mm drive shaft, which is in aluminium, so it's lightweight. And these drive shafts are basically chosen for a good neutral basic setting of the car, which gives you good handling for most conditions. But we also offer optional drive shafts. We offer the 59mm length front drive shafts, which will give you a smoother car with a bit more cornering speed for large tracks, such as large asphalt tracks or high grip conditions where you need to take away initial steering from the car. And we also offer a shorter rear drive shaft, so a 52mm rear drive shaft, which will improve rotation and off-power steering, but it will reduce the overall grip from the car. So those options are nice to have, but most of the time we prefer to use the standard supply drive shafts. But something that we do use as team drivers are the ball bearing ECS drive shafts, which look like this. So instead of having the plastic drive shaft cap, which is standard, it has small ball bearings which go into the diff out drive. And this has a big benefit for the handling because it reduces the friction between the drive shaft and the out drive. So when the suspension is compressed, I mean, when you're in the corner, it puts less load on the drivetrain, and the car will be freer and it will have more grip on that end of the car. So for example, if you run them all around, it will give you more cornering speed and a more efficient drivetrain. If you run them only at the front of the car, it will give you a smoother direction change and just a bit freer front end, a bit more cornering speed, which is especially useful in higher grip conditions. And on the rear, when you put the ball bearing drive shafts on the rear of the car, it will free up the rear, it will give you more steering, more cornering speed, and usually faster lap times for most conditions. So that's why the team prefers to use the ball bearing drive shafts, both for the front ECS shafts and also for the rear CVD shafts. Keep in mind that you'll need to buy the optional diff and solid axle out drives, which are specifically made for the BB drive shafts. So those are really nice options, which I really recommend. But now we're gonna build the kit standard drive shafts, which I have in front of me. So we're gonna start here. I'm gonna put a piece of paper here so I don't make a mess. And we're gonna start with the rear CVD drive shaft. First thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna install this plastic drive shaft cap onto the drive shaft. So usually what I do is I push this cap onto the drive shaft like that, and I push it against the flat surface to get it installed on the drive shaft. These drive shaft caps are also offered in an orange plastic material, which is basically a graphite material, which is stronger, so they will last longer than the black standard plastic outdrives. I'm just going to repeat this process here. Okay, so let's build this drive shaft here. I'm going to show you how to build both one rear and one front drive shaft in this tech tip. So what I do first is I take the large coupling, which is for the rear drive shaft. The smaller couplings are for the front ECS drive shafts. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some medium strength thread lock. I'm going to apply this to the small set screw which goes into the coupling. It's very important to use thread lock on this screw because it can come loose from all the vibration. So it's very important to use thread lock there. And then it's important to lubricate this part with Hoodie graphite grease. It looks like this. It actually comes in the kit as well, the graphite grease. And I'm gonna apply a bit of grease here to the coupling, a generous amount, so that it stays lubricated for a fairly long amount of time. And then I take these outdrives, put it onto the drive shaft, and we're gonna put the little pins in there. And we tighten this set screw. Make sure it's nice and tight so it doesn't come loose during running. This one drive shaft done. Gonna take the next one. Sorry, we're gonna do the front drive shaft first, because I want to show you the ECS drive shaft build as well, because it's a little different than the rear. Okay, so repeat the procedure here. We put the drive shaft cap inside. And then we have, instead of one, we have two couplings for the front ECS drive shaft. So we have to do this twice here. We have to install set screws in each of the couplings with thread lock in both of them. You need to make sure that the thread lock doesn't get onto the coupling itself, because then it can make the drive shaft bind up and you'll have a movement that is not free, and the last thing you want is a binding drive shaft. So put the graphite grease onto the couplings here, install this into the drive shaft itself. That's part number one. Second part is the outer part, the drive axle. Put some graphite grease on here as well. So it's the same procedure as the rear, it's just it has to be done on both the drive axle and the drive shaft. And then we take the big cover or the case of the ECS drive shaft, which connects these two parts. And we put the pins in here. There's two pins, obviously. Tighten the set screw. It's actually the wrong pin. Make sure you get the correct length pins here, because the pins are shorter for the ECS drive shafts compared to the rear CVD drive shafts. Make sure you get the right length of pins. Then we install the second pin here into the front part. And we tighten that down. And that's all done, all built. Make sure it's free moving with very little friction and no binding. And there we have it. We have the two drive shafts ready, both front and rear. So let's finish up the build of these 4 drive shafts to continue on from our drive shaft tech tip. I'm just going to repeat the same procedure to these other 2 drive shafts. Get some tread lock on these screws. And some graphite grease. And we just repeat the same process for all the parts. So the drive shafts are now done, and we have concluded this chapter of the build. Building the uprights on the XRAY X4 is another chapter which has a lot of news and updates which you're going to find important and interesting. So let's look at the uprights on the XRAY X4. These parts are completely new. It's a completely redesigned part. So the kit comes with graphite plastic uprights. They are the same front and rear, but the aluminum plates which are included are different front and rear. So the front plates are a bit longer for the front steering, and the rear plates are a bit shorter because they're for the active rear suspension, the ARS, which is now built into the car as standard. And I'm going to explain a little bit about the option parts that we offer here. So for example, we offer the hubs, the uprights, also in aluminum material. They look like this, black aluminum. And the benefit of having these in aluminum is that they're stiffer, they're more rigid, so they provide better cornering speed for high grip conditions where there's a lot of load on the suspension. And of course they look great, but also the performance is increased for certain conditions. So those are the optional uprights which we recommend for competition racing. And also we offer the front steering arms in the +1 version, which means that this point here has been moved a bit outwards, so you'll have longer steering links. And this increases the Ackerman effect a little bit, but it also makes the steering more precise. So this can be a good option for high grip conditions as well, to make the car a bit more precise to drive and more predictable. So the +1 mm steering arms are recommended for high grip conditions. And then, of course, the wheel hubs, the hexes, they are completely redesigned as well. They look like this. And I'm going to show you how to build everything in a minute, but first I'm going to explain that we have optional wheel hubs as well, which they look like this. They are the -0.5 mm hexes, which they make the car narrower, and that can help to generate more grip and more steering for low grip conditions. So let's get on with the build of these uprights. What we're going to do first is we're going to take our drive shafts that we just built in the previous video. I'm going to put this here, and I'm going to start with the rear, so the CVD drive shafts. And we're going to take some clips here. We're going to need these little E-clips, which are very nicely designed. And then we have these steel shims. These steel shims here, they are made for being installed in between the bearings in the hubs. And why is that? That's because we want to remove some play. So now we're going to install the shim in between these two bearings. Let's throw it in there, and finally the other bearing as well. And then we're going to take the hex, the wheel hub. We're going to put it in here. Make sure that it's moving freely. Actually, what you can do at this stage is you can install some Hoodie and bearing oil into the bearings to make sure that they are properly lubricated and to prolong their life. Put that aside, and then we install the wheel hub, drive shaft, so here what you need to do is you need to look for the flat spot. The flat spot of the drive axle. I don't know if you can see it on the video, but there's a little flat spot here. It needs to be pointing upwards towards the opening of the hex. And why is that? That's because you're then able to install and remove the little E-clip onto the flat spot. So push this in here. We're going to use a Hoodie long nose pliers to push this in place. See, there it goes, very easily. And then we're going to push this whole assembly back and forth to make sure that we got free movement. There should not be excessive play, but there should be free movement, and this should spin freely inside of the hub. Okay, so that's built. Then what do we do if we want to remove this? We take a small flathead screwdriver, we push it into the little slot between the flat spot on the drive axle and the E-clip. And we push the E-clip out like that. It comes out, and it's very easy to install and remove. All you need is long nose pliers. And a small flathead screwdriver. Both are offered from Hoodie. Okay, so that's the rear. That means that we're gonna use the shorter aluminum extension plate for the rear, because that's for the ARS rear suspension. Put it on here. It's a little tight fit. Then we're gonna install the small 4mm steel screws. They look like this. in the outer hole of the rear upright assembly. And that's the upright fully built. That's the rear upright. You have to repeat this process for the front, obviously, but the only difference is that you'll use the front drive shaft and the long aluminum steering plate. I also need to mention that we offer these plates also in steel material. And the steel material will make them obviously more durable, so they're less likely to bend or tweak in a crash. So if you're worried about the durability, we also offer these plates in steel material. Okay, so that's the rear upright built. And we can move on with the build. So we're going to continue to build these hubs in the same way that I just shown. We install the bearings here, a little shim, another bearing. And there we have it. The front and rear uprights are built and ready to be mounted on the car. Building the upper arms on the XRAY X4. As you may have seen, the upper arms on this platform are completely new. They are in the same unique material as the lower arms, the CCF, carbon composite fusion, which is something unique for XRAY. And they have a V shape, just like the lower arms. And to assemble these, it requires a bit of attention, and I'm going to show you the most important steps in the assembly of the upper arms. So I have here in front of me the front left and the rear right arms. It's important to notice the direction of the arms. They're marked underneath with a printing on the arm. So in this case, it's rear left, and this one is front left. So make sure that you put them on the right corner of the car. The next step is to start with these ball cups, which connects the upper arm to the uprights. They're different front and rear. So the front one has a hole in it for the body upstop screw. That's the front ball cup. The rear one has no hole in it. The next step is to install the large set screws into the ball cups. And here we have to pay attention to the length of the ball cups. But first we're gonna add a bit of graphite grease to the treads, because they will tread a lot easier into the upper arms. So we add a bit of graphite grease here, and we start threading this in. So the length that you're looking for the rear ball cup is 29.5 millimeters. I'm gonna check this with a caliper. It's already too short here. Too long. Needs to be 29.5, perfect. That's done. We're gonna do the same for the front. I'm gonna thread this in here with graphite grease to make it thread easier. And then we're gonna check the length. The length for the front should be 31, so longer than the rear. Let's check this until you get it completely right. Okay, 31. Okay, next step. Take the hex driver, put it through the upper arm, and before installing this, we're gonna add a little bit of thread lubrication here with the graphite grease. And we're gonna install this into the upper arm. You put it inside of the upper arm and you start threading clockwise until it gets into the upper arm. The shiny side of the ball cup needs to be pointing downwards. so keep in mind that orientation. Just thread this in until sort of getting close to the bottom, and then we finally adjust the camber later on. I just put this together now and I adjust the length later on. Then of course for the pivot balls I'm gonna use the great Hoodie multi-tool. The pivot balls for the inside portion of the arm, they go in from the bottom of the arm like this. Just install them like this with the Hoodie multi-tool. Very easy and convenient. And then same for the front. Okay, just quickly gonna repeat the process for the front so that you can see. We add a bit of graphite grease here to the thread. Put the hex driver through the upper arm. Start threading it in. Note the orientation of the ball cup, the shiny side down, because the shiny side is from where you're gonna install the outer ball studs. Just thread this in almost all the way, and then we can adjust the camber later on. Okay, and then to install the outer ball studs, we again use the Hoodie multi-tool. We remove the pin, put the ball stud in there, and we pop this in here. Oh, went a bit too far. Like that is done. Make sure it's moving freely. Repeat the process for the other one. And that's all done. That's how you assemble the upper arms for the X4. In this section of the build, we are gonna build anti-roll bars on the X4. So we're gonna start by putting these together. So as you can see here, I've separated all the parts, and we're gonna start with the longer set screws that come in this bag. They are for the ball cups, which hold the anti-roll bars. We're gonna put the long set screws in these plastic parts here. Make sure that you thread them in straight. That's all done. And then we have the short set screws that come in this bag. They are gonna go into these aluminium pieces which hold the anti-roll bars into the bearings. So we put the short set screws in these parts to prepare these to go into the car. Then the last one goes here. Okay, that's all done. The next step is to install these special ball studs into those ball cups. These ball studs have no shoulder, as you can see. It's a specially made part for the X4 to be able to have the roll bar sitting very low in the car. So again, we're going to utilize the Hoodie multi-tool for this task, which is always a big help when you have to do ball stud and ball cup installation. Okay, so we're going to put a little ball stud in here, and we're going to pop it in place with the multi-tool. We repeat this 4 times. all done, and then we are going to we're gonna thread these ball studs into the short ball cups. We thread them all the way down, and then we adjust the height when we're gonna set up the anti-roll bar, which will be in the anti-roll bar tech tip video. So these are all going here. Next one. Okay, now we can try to put these on the car. So we start with the rear, which is the bigger anti-roll bar is the one for the rear of the car. It's the 1.2 millimeter one for the graphite kit version and a 1.3 millimeter one for the asphalt kit. Sorry, aluminium chassis kit. Okay, let's do this here. We put the bearings on first, and then the aluminium pieces. I prefer to put these on here before I try to install it on the car. Then you simply slide these on here. Do it on one side first, and then the other side. And then when you tighten these pieces down, we need to make sure that we have sufficient play from side to side for the anti-roll bar, so that it's not binding. You should have a little bit of play so that it can move from side to side during cornering. So when you tighten these down, pay attention to the play. Cannot be too much, but should be a little bit. Just a little bit of play. Okay, done. And then we're gonna install these ball cups. You can install these with your hands. You can just push them onto the plastic balls here. Just click them on there, and then we're gonna put the wire into these ball cups. And tighten it down. Repeat on the other side. Done. Then repeat this process for the front. So it's the smaller anti-roll bar that goes on the front. It's a 1.3 millimeter one for the graphite kit and a 1.4 millimeter one for the alloy aluminium chassis kit. Once again, slide these in place. And then on the other side. once again, we need to make sure that we have sufficient play from side to side. Most of all, it's important on the front end to have a bit more play for the anti-roll bar than in the rear. And I'm gonna explain why. So in the front of the car, if you don't use the chassis brace here, the bulkhead brace, you're gonna have a lot of flex from side to side during cornering. So the bulkheads will actually fold in and out like this during cornering, because there's nothing stiffening them in between. So you need a little bit more play for the anti-roll bar, so the anti-roll bar doesn't bind up during cornering. So it's very important to have a bit of play there for that reason. And then we're gonna install the ball cups here for the arms. You can do that with your hands. One and two. And then we put the wires into these. Tighten these down. Okay, it's installed as well. All done. Okay, so make sure that we have free movement here, that the roll bars are not binding up the suspension. Same thing in the rear, look for the free movement here, and that we have no binding. Okay, that's how it works to install the anti-roll bars on the X4.